Alright, now welcome back to this series of building a website with HTML and CSS, and I hope you are getting along with this course. So we've just talked about the different ways to write our CSS. Now what we'll be doing in this video is to see how to use CSS to flesh out our HTML documents to make them look nicer on the web browser. But in order to do this, it's important to talk about CSS selectors and syntax. So CSS has what we call syntax, which is the format for writing your CSS code, just as you've seen the format for writing your HTML tags. So what are CSS selectors? CSS selectors are used to locate any HTML elements based on their name, class, ID, or attributes. What that means is for you to be able to style any HTML elements such as the heading or the paragraph or an image or a link, for you to be able to style any of those, that element has to have either a name or a class, an ID or an attribute. So I'm going to start with the inline CSS I've already done here. So before I wrote this inline CSS, this was like this. Yeah, without the quotes. And let me save and preview on the web browser. Alright, so now I said to style any HTML elements. That element should either have a name, a class, an ID, or an attribute. Going back to this h1 tag, I did something like this: style equals to, and then color blue. In this case, the h1 tag have been given an attribute known as style, and with this style I'm able to add a property called color and then a value which is blue, which makes it possible for me to see this on the web browser as a blue heading. So that is number one. Another way you can style any HTML document is giving that element a class name. This is having an attribute. Now let's do same for the paragraph. In the paragraph case, I'm going to give it a class name, which is, I'm going to say paragraph class equals to, and then I can call it whatever name I want. Let's say p style for short, paragraph style, or paragraphs, let's say styling. Okay, so this can be anything. And the difference between the class name and the style attribute is that we use the style attribute is used to style inline, but we use a class name or an ID to style either internally or externally from your index.css over here. So, and another thing you should know is that the class name goes with a period symbol. So you can't style a class name directly inline because it's not an inline CSS. We use style attributes to give an inline CSS. But whenever we want to style internally or externally, we use either a class name, which in this case is the paragraph class, or an ID, paragraph ID. So that is that. Let me style this paragraph by giving it a color of green. So remember, when you're using a class or an ID, you can't style inline, but rather you're either styling internally or externally. So since we are using an external CSS in this case, and I use a class name here, then I'm going to style this paragraph with the class, which is the period, and then the name, p styling. Then we say color green. So I'll save, and I'll also save from this end. So let's see that on the web browser and see if that works. So you can see the paragraph have been changed to green. So to style a class name, you pick up the class, which is a period sign, and then the name of the class, in this case p styling, and inside the curly braces goes the property and the value. So this is what we call CSS syntax. Over here, this first one is the selector, which selects these HTML elements, which is the paragraph here. And the second is the curly braces that holds the property and the value. So everything here is known as the syntax. So this is the syntax to write your CSS code. Okay, what if this paragraph is given an ID? It's quite the same. All we need to do is change this from the period symbol to hash symbol. So let's change the color to yellow. We'll save and view on the web browser. You can see, you can hardly see that. So that's it. Our paragraph have been changed from green to yellow using the ID. So that's basically how to use CSS to style any HTML document. To achieve that, the element has to have either a class name, an ID, or an attribute. So now that you've known how to style your HTML elements, it's now time to begin to dive deeper into what we have for this course.